Our topic today it's related to the human drive for control, but ultimately it's about control. How much control do we want and need in our life? What we learn more and more, and we're going to explore this more when we do our group coaching, that there are a lot of areas that in our mind or our mind tries to control that we can't actually control. It focuses energy on those areas. And as soon as that ends up happening, it takes a lot of our mental and emotional bandwidth, which could be used towards very effective areas that are very important for us to focus on. So what I want to kind of separate the two is what areas do we want to control? What areas do we not want to control? But I want to share a little bit of story, and this will kind of couple of stories. One story around our team, and I think it's been an important kind of growth realization as I've gone through like being part of a team the past two years plus. What I've realized is that the areas that we try to kind of control is like, oh, this should be a certain way that I have done. It tends to break down after a while. Like it might work initially because you want it a certain way, and then it tends to break down. And we started with a team of 6, and we are down to 4. And we realized that the ones who couldn't kind of play in a team environment in a business setting were those who were very much that this is my process, I got to control it in this way. There was very little input, even though all we kept offering is like, hey, what do you need help with? What do you need support with? We can do. And then ultimately what ended up happening, they took on too many projects, they got burnt out. And then afterwards, like, well, I'm putting in too much effort. Now they made an internal decision to control too many aspects of the project instead of kind of delegating parts of that, even though the whole team offered, but they never heard that because they, in their mind, the only way to approach it was to do it myself. The best way is to do it myself. And this is a very, I would say this is a mentality that's taught to us. It's not necessarily natural, I would say. It's one of those mentalities that we're taught, oh, you need to get good at this, you need to focus on this area, you need to control this part of your life. So it becomes too much, too amplified. And even when you, especially if you've gone to the corporate world and all sorts of things, depending on which culture you come from, unless it's one of the newer models for collaboration, you will likely, even though you're part of an office setting, even though you're part of an organization, a team, you'll likely have your specific ways of doing this. And you haven't learned quite how to approach it. And then we can expand it further out. Like, what does an average person do? On average, what are our thoughts involved in? Well, our thoughts tend to want to protect us. So a lot of times it feels like we're trying to control things that we don't need to control. We don't need to think about too much. We need to be aware of it, but we don't need to get inundated by it. Such as things around economy. Like a lot of people are thinking about an economy right now. Oh, shoot, what's going to happen? What's going to happen with my assets, with my investments? What's going to happen with my job? What's going to happen with my business? Well, the reality is that you can't really do much with the bigger economy. But you can understand the trend and think about, well, which direction do I want to take my life towards? Well, how do I want to look at my savings? How do I want to look at my business? How do I want to look at my skill sets? But for most people, because the thoughts around fear and contraction comes in and they feel stuck in that area, oh my God, let me turn on the TV. What's going to happen? Something's going to go wrong. And that's the big difference between getting inundated constantly by that craziness, or, for example, go watch a couple of workshops, see what are people at the higher level saying, and does that make sense? Does that feel aligned? And I did that. And I'm like, okay, now I can formulate a way that in fact, when I went through actual workshops and watched business owners think about this in specific ways, especially those who inspire me, I actually doubled down on my business. I'm like, holy shoot, this is the time to make more money. But before I was thinking like, oh, okay, how do I approach this? I don't know what the hell is going on. but there are a lot of businesses that are gearing up to benefit from what's happening. And there are a lot of people struggling with this. And a lot of times we feel like, people are in trouble. It's a huge mindset shift. There are people who find opportunities in these kind of situations. It doesn't matter what level you're at. It doesn't matter what level of income, job you're in, you can find opportunities. It doesn't matter what level of business you're in, but it's a mindset shift there. So the focus is not the bigger economy. The focus is how do you leverage what's happening in the world? Same thing with politics. It's the same exact story. People will constantly watch, like, what is this politician going to do? Well, the only thing that matters is what policies that this politician create, and how does that affect you, your family, and community? And how do you can't control the policies. Maybe you can if they say, well, we vote for the right people, great. But ultimately, all politicians follow very similar systems. They either go one direction or another. Now you're thinking about, okay, how do I want to approach my life based on this system? Because I can't control the system. And let's look at other areas that people think about, like, for example, other people. That's why I shared my story around my team, is that it's interesting because we know that we can't control people. People make their own decisions, even the people closest to us. But we have this urge to want to get people to go towards a direction with us, or they should do what we do. Well, that's natural to some degree, because if we're part of a tribe, we want people to feel aligned with us. But then the question is, who actually feels aligned with you? And can you force alignment? And what I've learned is you cannot force alignment. You can share who you are, you can share your vision, you can share what you're about. At one end, you're going to attract certain people towards you. At another end, you will deter certain people, whether they're friends, business partners, or even within family members. You will find this differentiation. Some people will feel aligned with some family members, but not with other family members. The ones who are more clear about how to express themselves, they attract the right supporters. And even like something like, as I often think about my children, because there is influence. There's influence from me towards them, from them towards me. But how do I want to influence them? Now, for me, the bigger picture is that they are going into a world that is so different than the world that I grew up in. That often I struggle to understand the newer generation and what they're involved in. I have to be very, very open. Same for the last generation. My parents struggle to understand me. My older brother and cousins, they struggle to understand me. So there's a generational gap, and especially because the world is becoming more and more complex, do we give people the space to grow and have the space to kind of share themselves, whatever they were learning? Because ultimately, like, the world is accelerating in so many ways. Information is getting more. Technology is exponentially growing. The world is converging. It's becoming smaller in a lot of ways. We're seeing so many people. I mean, every time I travel, I feel like I meet people from all around the world. And you find out, well, what kind of world will they live in? Well, more than likely a world where they're moving to different places. More than likely a world where they're meeting people from different beliefs and different ways of thinking. So they need to have a very strong grounding into themselves. They need to understand themselves. They need to find what feels aligned with them. Yes, I will give them certain values within our household, within our home, but ultimately they have to make certain decisions about how do they want to show up in the world? Who do they want to attract? And if I make it too rigid for my children, for example, they might break. Like, it's a very basic engineering concept. Like, if you make a building too rigid, it will break under the shifts, and you'll see that almost every building has movement. Bridges are the same story. If it's too rigid, it'll break down. And then if it's too all over the place, too random, it's still negative. So where is the middle ground? Where is the balance? And ultimately, we're all learning. I don't know what that means. Everybody will have their version of what balance is, but at least understanding that there needs to be a little bit of structure, but there needs to be a little bit of openness to growth for everybody. And I think, and also recognizing ourselves that there are parts of us we still don't recognize, we still don't understand, we're growing ourselves. And I think the most dishonest thing any adult or any grown human being can say is that, oh, I figured out everything. And I should tell my children what to be and how to be and exactly do this, that, and the other. I don't know what's best for them, to be honest. I know certain things which I'll pass on, but certain other things I don't know. They'll have to learn. In fact, they'll have to pass on, I'll have to pass the baton forward, the metaphorical baton. Here, I did my best to figure this out. It's up to you and your generation and the next couple of generations. And it's funny, like I live in northern Ontario, southern Ontario. It gets pretty cold, and you constantly hear, as soon as winter hits, oh my God, the snow, the weather is miserable. And people actually say the weather is miserable. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? How could the weather be miserable? It's cold, it's snowy. Well, you can do one of two things. You either accept the weather for what it is and you enjoy it, and there are people who do that, or you get away from there. But people don't do either one of them. They sit there and complain about it, and everybody else picks up on it, and you hear the same things. Hey, what's going on? Oh, I hate it. Such a miserable day. I'm like, why? It's snowing. I'm like, well, it looks beautiful. and, but that's a different story. So it's like they allow thoughts that are outside of their control, that take their energy and focus away, to invade their space, their mind space. And world events is another thing. Like, there are so many things going on in the world. There are so many things that we need to improve. There are so many things that as a species, as nations, as groups, that we need to work through. It becomes ultimately, I think it does a lot of disservice when people are constantly watching the misery and the problems around the world. And because at some point we get desensitized. Oh shit, another city that was bombed, another set of people that died of hunger, another set of people. And we think that if we watch it, we'll care more, but that's not what actually happens. People get desensitized because the news keeps pumping more and more of the same thing. And at some point your psychology gets overloaded, like, well, I can't do anything about this. Well, actually you can. If you stayed away from all those fear-based stuff, you can start with your own space. And one of the decisions I made was, well, what can I control? There are a lot of things that are not in my control, even in my family. I consider myself a leader. And when I look around in my family, people do their own things. But then I realized, okay, where do I have influence? Well, there are certain people that I feel aligned with, and they could become leaders in the community. What if I focused on those people who I can empower them to be better leaders? And I did. And that has paid off a lot more than thinking about, oh, why is this person doing this? Why is that person? It doesn't matter to me. They made a choice. I'll be there, but they make certain choices. I can't get frustrated based on other people's choices, unless obviously it directly affects me. Then in that case, it's a boundary issue. Now, then where do we focus our attention? These are the areas that we need to be incredibly intentional and very focused on. Okay, these are the areas that I need to be focused on. And whether you're at a job or you're at a business or your home, well, does your work bring fulfillment? Do your relationships bring fulfillment? And by fulfillment, I mean, when you're around people, do you feel like this was a meaningful time? Did it feel aligned with who you are? Was there joy? Was there challenge? Was there inspiration? Or were you around people and half the people were on their phone? I literally had that difficult conversation yesterday with my wife. I'm like, hey, listen, and I've been thinking about this a lot. Most of my week, I work about 4.5 days. So 4.5 days, I have the most meaningful conversations. I'm around some incredible people. I always feel inspired, but a lot of times when I go back to like around my family members, some of them, like the first couple hours, amazing. I get to see them, great. Everybody's great. And we get excited after about 2 hours. This is what you see. And then I thought, and then I'll still find a way, like I'll focus on some conversations with kids and we'll do stuff, we'll have fun. But after a while, it feels like, okay, why am I spending time here? Like I could be doing so much with my time. And I literally told my wife, I'm like, on both sides of my family and my wife's family, I basically shared that, you know what, my time is very valuable. I could put in this time to spend time with my kids, be present with them. I don't need to be in a crowd that's distracted, that's in their own world, they're in pain, they don't want to deal with it, so they're distracted. And I purposely make sure I don't have my phone around me, or it's in my pocket or away somewhere. But then what do you do? Well, you can do one of two things. You share what you feel, and I have, and that's are the choices. The rest is, okay, I can minimize my distance with them, and I can be in conversations that are more meaningful to me with certain people in my family. And I did, and that's my intention. I literally said, okay, let's focus that time with ourselves. In fact, we made some big decisions. We're actually traveling a lot more. And that's where the second part came in, the novelty. We can control novelty in our life. And a lot of times we all at some point, get stuck in our own routines. Routine is a good thing to a certain level. But after a while, when you get so comfortable in your own routine over and over, you're doing something, you're not exposed to anything new outside or in your mind or in your consciousness, then you kind of start to coast. And there's something weird in our psychology that comfort becomes too painful. That's where it helps to be around people who share a different perspective. It helps to go to a completely different place. Like, we just traveled for 3 weeks. It was one of the most challenging times to go through. Our kids got sick. We lost our election, but we had some of the most transformative thoughts about our life. We realized so many different things. Now we're actually going in a completely different direction than we were thinking before, just because of the realizations that we had during that time that we spent together. And part of that is actually wanting to go and travel more and go to more events and just see what comes up and get our kids exposed to that. But that wouldn't have happened if we didn't just put ourselves in different scenarios. And then finally, this is probably the most important one of all this, is if there's anything that we can control, is our character and outlook. Our character is, well, how do we show up in our life? Do we show up excited? Do we show up with the intention to deal with our challenges or avoid challenges? Do we show up with passion? Do we show up with randomness or structure? Do we show up to support others? Do we show up with a lack of care, indifference? That all those things, I think, make up our character, and a lack of intentionality towards that means that you're just getting pulled into other people, the way other people have defined their character, and your system just copies other people around you automatically, whatever that crowd is. And then the outlook is your own perception. There's a lot of control we have on our perception. It means that whatever new perspective you take in, it changes your perception. Whatever new thing you go through, whether that's traveling or going through a coaching program or reading a book, it changes your perception. Whatever experience you go through, whether that being in nature, being around somebody specifically, or being around a mentor, all these things changes your outlook, expands your outlook. And if we have a limited outlook, that's probably a better investment of our focus to, let's go, how do we expand this in different ways?